The autumn wind whistled through the dense Montana forest, carrying with it the familiar scent of pine needles and damp earth that Mark Thompson had grown to love over the years. As an environmental analyst in Bozeman, he spent his days poring over data and reports, but it was here, among the towering trees and rugged terrain, that he truly felt alive. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows through the branches as Mark followed his usual trail, his boots crunching softly against the fallen leaves. At 42, Mark's weathered face and careful movements spoke of countless hours spent in these woods. His colleagues at the Environmental Agency often questioned his solitary hiking habits, but they didn't understand the profound peace he found in these mountains. Every evening after work, he would drive to this particular trailhead, park his old Subaru, and disappear into the wilderness for hours. It wasn't just exercise or escape, it was a ritual, a communion with something deeper than himself. This evening, however, felt different. As Mark ventured deeper into the forest, he noticed subtle changes that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The usual chorus of birdsong had fallen silent, and the rustling of small animals in the underbrush had ceased. The forest held its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. Even the wind seemed to die down, leaving an unnatural stillness in its wake. Mark paused, his senses heightened by years of wilderness experience. He'd learned to trust his instincts out here, and right now, every fiber of his being told him something was amiss. The familiar trail, one he'd walked hundreds of times before, somehow felt foreign in the growing darkness. The trees, usually welcoming friends, now loomed over him like silent sentinels, guarding ancient secrets. As he rounded a bend in the trail, Mark froze. Ahead of him, illuminated by the last rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy, stood a massive grizzly bear. But this wasn't the typical encounter he'd been trained for. The bear wasn't foraging or moving through the territory. It stood completely still in the middle of the path, head lowered, emitting a sound that made Mark's chest tighten. It wasn't a growl or a threat display, but rather a low, mournful sound that seemed almost human. Every survival instinct screamed at Mark to slowly back away, to make himself small and non-threatening, to find an escape route. Yet something in the bear's posture, in the way it swayed slightly as if carrying a great weight, kept him rooted to the spot. The creature's eyes, when they finally met his, held an intelligence that transcended normal animal awareness. They were eyes that seemed to know him, to recognize something in him that Mark himself couldn't yet understand. Years of working in environmental conservation had taught Mark about animal behavior, about the delicate balance between human and wildlife interactions. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. The bear's gaze held him transfixed, and in those eyes he saw something that stirred ancient memories, like a half-remembered dream from childhood. The bear slowly turned its massive head toward an overgrown path that branched off from the main trail, a path Mark had never noticed before, despite his countless hikes in these woods. The animal took a few deliberate steps in that direction, then looked back at Mark with an expectant gaze. Every rational thought told him to turn around, to head back to his car and the safety of civilization. But the pull of mystery, the weight of unspoken secrets in the bear's eyes, was stronger than reason. As twilight deepened around them, Mark made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life. With careful, measured steps, he began to follow the bear into the unknown. The path they took seemed to wind deeper into the heart of the forest, leading him away from familiar territory and into a realm where the rules of the ordinary world began to blur and fade. The trees grew closer together here, their branches intertwining overhead to create a natural tunnel. Mark could barely make out the bear's silhouette ahead of him, moving with surprising grace for such a large creature. The air grew thick with an energy he couldn't explain, and each step seemed to carry him further from the world he knew and closer to something ancient and mysterious that lay waiting in the depths of these Montana woods. The fading light cast strange shadows through the ancient trees as Mark followed the grizzly deeper into unknown territory. The familiar sounds of the forest had given way to an otherworldly silence, broken only by the soft crunch of leaves beneath his feet and the rhythmic breathing of the massive creature ahead. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with the weight of untold stories and forgotten memories. As they ventured further, Mark noticed peculiar markings on the trees, ancient symbols carved into the bark, nearly hidden beneath years of growth. They seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence in the gathering darkness, creating an ethereal path through the woods. The rational part of his mind tried to dismiss these strange sights as tricks of the light, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was unfolding around him. The bear moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back as if to ensure Mark was still following. Its eyes continued to hold that unsettling intelligence, and in the deepening twilight they seemed to glow with an inner light. The creature's behavior defied everything Mark knew about wildlife, yet he felt no fear, only an overwhelming sense that he was being guided toward something he was meant to find. After what seemed like hours, they emerged into a hidden clearing that seemed to exist in a world of its own. The space was perfectly circular, surrounded by towering pines that leaned inward, creating a natural dome overhead. In the center of the clearing stood an old cabin, its wooden walls weather-beaten and covered in climbing vines. The structure seemed to pulse with the same strange energy Mark had noticed in the forest, as if it were breathing in sync with the wilderness around it. The bear stopped at the edge of the clearing, its massive form silhouetted against the last remnants of daylight. It turned to face Mark, and in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The air between them seemed to shimmer, and Mark could have sworn he saw the image of a young boy briefly superimposed over the bear's form, a child with sad eyes and clothing from another era. The vision lasted only a second, but it left Mark feeling dizzy and disoriented. Drawing a deep breath, Mark approached the cabin. The wooden steps creaked beneath his weight, each sound echoing in the unnatural silence of the clearing. The door, heavy with age, swung open at his touch, revealing an interior that seemed frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the beam of light from his flashlight, and the air inside carried the musty scent of forgotten memories. The cabin's single room was filled with artifacts from another age. Tattered circus posters clung to the walls, their colors faded but still visible enough to show images of magnificent performances and exotic animals. Old equipment lay scattered about, hoops, ropes, and what appeared to be training tools. But it was the collection of photographs on a small table that drew Mark's attention. With trembling hands, he picked up one of the photos. The black and white image showed a circus troupe posed proudly before a massive tent, and in the front row stood a small boy holding the hand of a man in a ringmaster's costume. The boy's face caused Mark's heart to skip a beat. He bore an uncanny resemblance to Mark's own childhood photographs, down to the distinctive birthmark near his left eye. A loud creak from behind made Mark spin around, but the bear had vanished. Instead, through the cabin's window, he could see strange lights dancing among the trees, weaving between the trunks like fireflies, but larger and more purposeful. The symbols he'd noticed earlier now glowed more brightly, creating a network of luminescent patterns throughout the forest. As Mark studied the photograph more closely, he noticed something written on its back in faded ink. The Starlight Circus Family, 1952. The Boy Who Speaks to Bears. The words sent a chill down his spine, and as if in response, the entire cabin seemed to exhale, causing the dust to swirl in mysterious patterns around him. In the growing darkness, Mark realized he should head back, but the mystery of this place had him firmly in its grip. He pocketed the photograph, unable to shake the feeling that it was meant for him to find. As he stepped back outside, the forest had transformed. The trees seemed to whisper ancient secrets, and the very air hummed with an energy that spoke of magic and forgotten promises. The walk back to his car was a blur of swirling thoughts and questions. The rational world of environmental analysis and scientific data seemed far away now, replaced by a reality where bears could lead men to hidden cabins and photographs could bridge gaps of decades. As he drove home that night, Mark knew his life had changed irrevocably. The forest had chosen to share its secrets with him, and he was now bound to uncover the truth behind the mysterious circus and his apparent connection to it. Sleep eluded Mark that night. The photograph from the cabin lay on his bedside table, its edges worn and yellowed with age. Yet the image remained hauntingly clear. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boy's face, his own face, staring back at him from across the decades. The rational part of his mind searched for logical explanations, but the strange events in the forest defied conventional understanding. The next morning at work, Mark found himself struggling to focus on his environmental reports. The computer screen before him displayed data about Montana's wildlife patterns, but his thoughts kept drifting to the bears' mournful sounds and those mysterious symbols carved into the trees. His colleague, Sarah Chen, noticed his distraction during their morning meeting. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she remarked, sliding a cup of coffee across his desk. "Rough night in the woods." Mark hesitated, running his fingers through his graying hair. Sarah had been his friend for years, one of the few people who understood his connection to the forest. But how could he explain what had happened without sounding completely unhinged? Before he could respond, his computer screen flickered, and for a brief moment, he swore he saw the circus symbols from the cabin reflected in the dark monitor. "I found something out there," he finally said, carefully pulling out the photograph. "Something that doesn't make sense." Sarah studied the image, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion. "The resemblance is uncanny," she admitted, tracing the outline of the boy's face. "But this photo is, 70 years old? It can't be." A sudden gust of wind rattled the office windows, causing both of them to jump. Outside, storm clouds gathered unnaturally quickly over the mountains, casting the room in an eerie twilight. The lights in the office dimmed momentarily, and when they brightened again, Mark noticed something on his forearm that hadn't been there before, a faint marking that resembled one of the symbols he'd seen in the forest. "Mark," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "Your arm." The symbol seemed to pulse with a subtle warmth, and as Mark touched it, a flood of fragmented images filled his mind, canvas tents billowing in the wind, the sound of distant music, the smell of sawdust and cotton candy, and the sensation of a small, warm hand holding his own. The visions felt like memories, but they couldn't be his. They belonged to another time, another life. Throughout the day, strange occurrences continued to pile up. His computer kept displaying old circus advertisements whenever the screen went dark. The potted plants in his office seemed to grow more vigorously, their leaves turning to face him as if drawn by an unseen force. During his lunch break, a group of crows gathered outside his window, their intelligent eyes following his every move. As evening approached, Mark found himself drawn back to the forest, despite the threatening weather. The storm clouds hung low over the mountains, but no rain fell. The air crackled with static electricity, and the trees swayed without wind. This time, he didn't need the bear to guide him. His feet seemed to know the way to the hidden clearing. The cabin looked different in the strange stormlight, more alive somehow. New details emerged that he hadn't noticed before. Intricate carvings around the doorframe, wind chimes made from old circus tokens, and a peculiar sundial in the overgrown garden that pointed toward the mountains rather than the sun. Inside, Mark discovered a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard, containing a leather-bound journal. The pages were filled with elegant handwriting, documenting the daily life of the Starlight Circus, but between accounts of performances and training sessions were references to something else: rituals performed under the full moon, ancient pacts with forest spirits, and a special connection between certain circus performers and the animals they worked with. One entry caught his attention. Young Thomas shows remarkable gifts. The bears respond to him in ways I've never seen before. The old ones speak of a prophecy, a child born with the mark of the forest who would bridge the world of humans and spirits, but such power comes with a price, and I fear what the awakening might bring. The name Thomas stirred something in Mark's memory. Like a half-remembered lullaby, as he read, the symbol on his arm grew warmer and the storm outside intensified. Through the cabin's window, he could see the strange lights dancing among the trees again, more numerous now, weaving patterns that matched the journal's mysterious descriptions. A loud knock at the cabin door made Mark jump. The journal slipped from his hands, pages fluttering open to reveal a pressed flower, a rare species he'd never seen before. When he opened the door, he found only empty air and swirling leaves, but a clear set of footprints led away from the cabin, heading deeper into the forest. The prints were neither human nor animal, but something in between, as if reality itself were beginning to blur at the edges. The mysterious footprints leading away from the cabin seemed to shimmer in the strange twilight, each step marked by a faint luminescence that pulsed like a heartbeat. Mark's rational mind told him to retreat, to return to the safety of his familiar world, but the symbol on his arm burned with an intensity that matched his growing curiosity. The journal, now safely tucked in his backpack, seemed to vibrate with energy, as if responding to the forest's ancient magic. Unable to resist the pull of mystery, Mark began following the ethereal trail. As he walked, the forest around him transformed. Ordinary trees took on extraordinary aspects, their bark spiraling into impossible patterns, leaves shifting colors that didn't exist in nature. The air grew thick with the scent of circus memories, cotton candy, sawdust, and something else, the musky sweetness of bear fur. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet changed. Instead of forest soil, he found himself walking on what appeared to be an old circus ring, the sawdust still perfectly preserved in a perfect circle. Around him, translucent images flickered like an old film projection, spectators in 1950s attire, acrobats spinning through the air, and in the center, a young boy, Thomas, standing confidently beside a massive bear. The vision was so vivid that Mark could hear the crowd's gasps of amazement as Thomas and the bear moved in perfect synchronization, their performance transcending mere training to become something magical. But there was something else in the boy's eyes, a shadow of concern that seemed out of place in such a young face. A rustling in the undergrowth brought Mark back to the present. The bear from before emerged into the phantom circus ring, but this time something was different. In the strange light, Mark could see two realities overlapping, the bear as it was now, and the same bear from the circus performance decades younger. The creature's eyes held centuries of wisdom, and when it opened its mouth, the sound that emerged was neither growl nor roar, but words, distorted and distant. The circle must be completed, Mark Thompson. What was bound in starlight must be unbound in moonlight. Mark staggered backward, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. The symbol on his arm flared brightly, and suddenly he was flooded with memories that weren't his own. Thomas learning the secrets of the forest from an old circus mystic. The bear, then just a cub, being blessed under a full moon, and a ritual performed in this very spot that somehow tied the fate of the circus to the ancient spirits of the Montana wilderness. As these visions washed over him, Mark noticed something extraordinary happening to the journal in his backpack. The pages began to fill themselves in, invisible ink becoming visible, revealing hidden passages written in a child's hand. Thomas's private thoughts. scattered throughout the ringmaster's official records, told a different story. One of a young boy slowly discovering his connection to something vast and mysterious, something that both thrilled and terrified him. Sarah's voice suddenly cut through his reverie. "Mark, what are you doing out here?" She emerged from the trees, holding a flashlight, concern etched on her face. But as she stepped into the phantom circus ring, she too froze, her eyes widening as she witnessed the overlapping realities. The bear acknowledged her presence with a regal nod, as if approving her role in what was to come. "I've been researching since this morning," Sarah said, her voice trembling with excitement. The Starlight Circus didn't just disappear, it transformed. There are stories, Mark, about how the whole circus vanished during their final performance, but not before several audience members reported seeing the animals and performers literally fade into the forest, like they were becoming one with the wilderness. As if responding to her words, the phantom images around them intensified. They could now see the final performance in its entirety, the audience's amazement turning to astonishment, then fear, as the boundary between reality and magic dissolved. At the center of it all was Thomas, tears streaming down his face as he made a choice that would echo through decades. The bear moved closer to Mark, and in its eyes he saw Thomas's reflection. The resemblance was undeniable, not just physical, but something deeper, a shared essence that transcended time. The symbol on Mark's arm began to change, expanding into a complex pattern that matched the carvings they'd seen on the trees. "You're him," Sarah whispered, connecting the impossible dots. "Somehow, you're Thomas, or part of him, returned to complete something that began 70 years ago." The wind picked up around them, carrying whispers in a language Mark somehow understood, the ancient tongue of the forest itself. The phantom circus ring began to pulse with energy, and in the distance more lights appeared among the trees, drawing closer like curious spirits awakening from a long slumber. Mark reached out tentatively toward the bear, and as his fingers brushed its fur, another wave of visions overwhelmed him. A ritual interrupted, a promise left unfulfilled, and a price that had to be paid to maintain the balance between the human world and the realm of spirits. He saw Thomas making a desperate choice to protect both the circus family and the forest's ancient magic, a choice that somehow resulted in his essence being carried forward through time, waiting to be reborn when the moment was right. The phantom circus ring pulsed with an otherworldly energy as Mark stood between two worlds, the bear's presence anchoring him to both past and present. Sarah watched in amazement as the symbol on his arm continued to spread, creating intricate patterns that seemed to mirror the constellations above. The forest around them had become alive with whispers, each tree a sentinel bearing witness to this extraordinary moment of awakening. "There's more in the archives," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper as she pulled out a leather portfolio from her bag. "I found these after you showed me the photograph." The Starlight Circus wasn't just any traveling show. It was known for its unusually strong bonds between performers and animals. Some called it training, but others... She spread out a collection of newspaper clippings on a nearby fallen log. The yellowed papers told stories of inexplicable events, animals performing impossible feats, mysterious lights during night shows, and performers who seemed to communicate without words. But it was a small article at the bottom that caught Mark's attention, a feature about a young animal whisperer named Thomas Sullivan, accompanied by a photograph that made his heart stop. In the image, Thomas wore a pendant identical to one Mark had kept in his drawer for years, a family heirloom he'd never understood. Without thinking, he reached beneath his shirt and pulled out the pendant he always wore. The two were perfect matches, down to the unusual symbols etched around the edges. The bear moved closer, its massive form surprisingly gentle as it approached the newspaper clippings. Its breath caused the papers to flutter, and suddenly the ink began to shift and change before their eyes. Hidden words appeared between the lines of text. Written in the same childish hand from the journal, "The pendant is the key. When the stars align, the circle must be completed. The forest remembers what humans forget." As if responding to these words, the pendant in Mark's hand grew warm. The symbols around its edge began to glow with the same ethereal light as the phantom circus ring. In that moment, fragments of Thomas's memories flooded Mark's consciousness with unprecedented clarity. Secret meetings with the circus mystic, learning to channel the forest's ancient power, and a growing understanding that the Starlight Circus was more than just entertainment. It was a bridge between worlds. "Look," Sarah pointed to the trees surrounding the clearing. The symbols they'd seen earlier were changing, rearranging themselves into patterns that matched the markings on Mark's pendant. The forest itself seemed to be revealing its secrets, one luminous glyph at a time. A soft, chiming sound drew their attention back to the phantom circus ring. In its center, a spectral figure had begun to materialize, an elderly woman in traditional circus costume, her silver hair adorned with stars. Mark recognized her from both the photographs and his newly awakened memories. Madame Elena, the circus mystic who had first recognized Thomas's gift. Her form was translucent, but her voice carried clearly through the evening air. "The time of convergence approaches. Little Thomas, the forest has waited long enough. What was scattered must be gathered. What was hidden must be revealed." The bear moved to stand beside the spectral figure, and together they created a tableau that bridged decades. Mark felt a pulling sensation in his chest, as if something long dormant was finally awakening. The pendant grew warmer still, and the symbol on his arm began to pulse in rhythm with the forest's heartbeat. Sarah gasped as she noticed small lights beginning to emerge from the ground around them. Not the ethereal spirits from before, but actual fireflies, thousands of them, rising from the earth in spiraling patterns. They formed constellations in miniature, perfect replicas of the star patterns that had shone above the circus tent on that final, transformative night. "The circus didn't just disappear," Mark said, understanding flowing through him like a river breaking through a dam. "It transcended. The final performance wasn't an ending, it was a transformation. But something went wrong, didn't it? The ritual wasn't completed." Madame Elena's spirit nodded solemnly. The magic was too powerful, the connection too deep. To protect both worlds, a choice had to be made. Thomas, you chose to fragment the circus's essence, scattering it through time and space until the right moment came to restore the balance. The bear released a low, mournful sound that seemed to shake the very ground. The fireflies responded by forming new patterns, revealing glimpses of other circus performers and animals, all waiting in a kind of mystical hibernation, their spirits preserved within the forest's ancient magic. As the revelation settled over them, Mark noticed something else. Music, faint but growing stronger. It wasn't the bright, cheerful melody of a typical circus performance, but something older and more profound. The notes seemed to emerge from the earth itself, carrying echoes of forgotten rituals and ancient promises. The hidden clearing had become a nexus of energy, where past and present, natural and supernatural, human and animal, all converged. Mark understood now that his lifelong connection to these woods wasn't just an affinity for nature. It was his fragmented soul trying to find its way back to this moment, this revelation, this chance to complete what had been left unfinished 70 years ago. The ethereal music continued to pulse through the clearing as Madame Elena's spirit approached Mark, her translucent form shimmering with starlight. The fireflies danced around them, their patterns growing more complex, telling stories in light and shadow. Sarah stood transfixed, documenting everything in a small notebook, her hands trembling with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. To complete the circle, Madame Elena's voice echoed through the space. You must gather what was scattered. The essence of the Starlight Circus lives on in 5 sacred objects, each holding a fragment of our collective magic. These tokens were distributed for safekeeping, hidden where the forest's power runs deep. The bear moved to the center of the phantom ring, and as it placed one massive paw on the ground, the earth beneath them trembled slightly. The fireflies responded by forming a map in the air, a constellation of 5 points spread across the Montana wilderness, each pulsing with a different colored light. The first token, Madame Elena continued, is the performer's bell. Cast from stardust and moonlight, it hangs in the branches of the Ancient One, a tree that has stood witness to 1,000 years of forest magic. Its ring can call to the spirits of all who once performed under our tent. As she spoke, one of the firefly points flared brighter, showing a massive old-growth tree deep in the forest's heart. Mark could feel its presence calling to him, a subtle pull that resonated with the symbol on his arm. Sarah stepped forward, her scientific mind trying to process the impossibility before her. These locations, she said, studying the firefly map, they all correspond to areas with unusual electromagnetic readings. We've been monitoring them for years, but could never explain the anomalies. The bear's eyes met Mark's, and suddenly he was flooded with another vision. Performers preparing for their final show, each one receiving a sacred object blessed under the stars. He saw Thomas himself helping to hide these artifacts, knowing they would be needed again someday. The second token is the ringmaster's watch. Madame Elena's voice grew more urgent. It doesn't tell ordinary time, but marks the moments when the veil between worlds grows thin. The third is the dreamer's mirror, which shows not reflections but possibilities. The fourth, the animal speaker's flute, carved from ancient wood and blessed by every creature in our care. And finally, the heart of the circus itself, a crystal that holds the combined energy of every performance, every laugh, every moment of wonder we ever created. As each object was named, the firefly lights pulsed correspondingly, creating a sacred geometry in the air above them. Mark's pendant grew warmer with each revelation, and the symbols on his arm shifted and changed, as if responding to the ancient magic being awakened. But we're not the only ones who know of these objects, Madame Elena warned, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. Others have sensed the stirring of old powers. The forest's magic calls to many, and not all who hear it understand its true nature. As if confirming her words, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, though no storm clouds were visible. The bear's fur bristled with static electricity, and the fireflies' dance became more erratic, their light fluctuating with nervous energy. Mark felt a sudden urgency, an understanding that time was somehow both abundant and scarce. The forest magic had waited decades for this moment, but now that it had begun, forces were in motion that couldn't be stopped or slowed. Sarah pulled out her tablet, quickly marking the locations indicated by the firefly map. The Ancient One, she said. I know where it is. It's in a protected grove about 10 miles north of here. We've been studying its ecosystem for years, but we always felt there was something different about it. The local wildlife behaves unusually around it, and compasses don't work properly in its vicinity. The bear moved to stand between Mark and Sarah, its massive form somehow managing to convey both protection and guidance. Through his connection with the creature, Mark understood that their paths were meant to converge. Sarah's scientific knowledge and his awakening magical abilities would both be necessary for what lay ahead. Madame Elena's form began to fade, but her voice remained clear. Remember, little Thomas, the objects alone are not enough. Each must be awakened by remembering the truth it holds. The real magic of the Starlight Circus was never in our tricks or performances, but in the bonds we shared, the dreams we wove, and the joy we brought to all who witnessed our magic. As her spirit dissipated like morning mist, the fireflies descended to form one final message in the air. When the moon reaches its peak in 3 nights, time, the veil will be at its thinnest. That is when the circle must be completed, or the chance will be lost for another generation. Dawn broke over the Montana wilderness, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. Mark and Sarah stood at the base of what locals called the Ancient One, a towering pine that dwarfed everything around it. In the early morning light, its massive trunk seemed to spiral upward endlessly, its branches disappearing into a canopy that filtered the sunlight into ethereal patterns on the forest floor. The bear had led them here through paths that seemed to shift and change, sometimes following trails that appeared only moments before they needed them. Sarah's scientific equipment had stopped working half a mile back, the delicate instruments overwhelmed by what she cautiously termed unusual electromagnetic activity. "The barriers between realities are thinner here," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. The symbol on his arm pulsed with a steady rhythm, and his pendant felt warm against his chest. "Can you feel it, the way the air seems to vibrate?" Sarah nodded, her usual scientific skepticism giving way to wonder. Around the base of the Ancient One, small flowers bloomed in impossible patterns, their petals shifting colors as they turned to follow their movement. The morning dew on the surrounding vegetation sparkled with an intensity that suggested something more than mere water droplets. The bear moved forward, pressing its nose against the massive trunk. Where it touched, ripples spread through the bark like waves on water. Mark felt a pulling sensation in his chest, and suddenly his vision shifted. He saw the tree as it had been throughout the centuries, witnessing generations of forest life, seasons bleeding into each other like watercolors. "There," Sarah pointed upward, her voice filled with awe. About 60 feet up, something gleamed among the branches, a metallic glint that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Mark's pendant. The bear released a low, rumbling sound, and the ground beneath their feet trembled slightly. Around them, the forest appeared to respond. Branches swayed without wind, flowers turned to face the Ancient One, and small animals emerged from hiding to watch with unusually intelligent eyes. "The performer's bell," Mark breathed, memories of Thomas flooding his consciousness. He saw himself, no, Thomas, helping to hide it here, climbing with the agility of youth while the circus mystic chanted below. But how do we reach it?" As if in response, shoots of ivy near the tree's base began to grow at an impossible rate, weaving themselves into a natural ladder up the trunk. Sarah gasped as she documented the phenomenon with her phone, the only piece of technology that still seemed to work in this enchanted space. "The forest is helping us," she whispered, watching as luminescent mushrooms sprouted along the trunk, marking a path upward. "It's responding to your presence, to your connection with Thomas." Mark approached the trunk, placing his hand against the bark. The moment he made contact, the symbols on his arm flared with light, and he felt a surge of energy course through his body. The tree's own memories merged with his consciousness. He saw the bell being placed, felt the weight of decades passing, witnessed the countless nights it had rung silently in the wind, its magic contained but not diminished. The climb seemed both eternal and instantaneous. As Mark ascended, the very nature of time seemed to fluctuate around him. Sometimes he felt as light as a feather, other times as if he moved through honey. Sarah followed close behind, her scientific observations giving way to pure wonderment as reality continued to bend around them. Near the bell's location, the branches grew in unusual patterns, forming a natural platform. As Mark reached it, he found himself face to face with the performer's bell. It hung suspended in a cradle of living wood, its silver surface etched with the same symbols that marked his arm. The metal seemed to flow like liquid starlight, and tiny constellations appeared to move across its surface. When Mark reached for the bell, the air around it shimmered. Spectral figures began to materialize on the surrounding branches, translucent forms of acrobats, jugglers, and dancers from the Starlight Circus. They watched in silent anticipation as Mark's fingers drew closer to the ancient artifact. "Wait!" Sarah called out, her researcher's instincts kicking in despite the supernatural circumstances. The mystic said each object needs to be awakened by remembering its truth. What was the bell's purpose in the circus? Mark closed his eyes, letting Thomas's memories wash over him. The bell had been more than just a signal to begin performances. It was a bridge between performers, a way to synchronize their hearts and minds, to create the perfect harmony needed for true magic to emerge. Opening his eyes, Mark began to hum a melody he'd never heard before, but somehow knew by heart. The Starlight Circus's secret song. The spectral performers joined in, their voices creating an otherworldly harmony. Below, the bear added its own deep, resonant tone to the chorus. As the song reached its crescendo, Mark grasped the bell. Its surface felt both cool and warm, solid and fluid. When he lifted it from its cradle, it rang with a clear, pure note that seemed to ripple through multiple dimensions. The spectral performers began to dance, their forms growing more substantial with each toll of the bell. The descent from the Ancient One was unlike anything Mark and Sarah had ever experienced. The performer's bell, cradled carefully in Mark's hands, continued to emit a subtle harmonic hum that seemed to alter the very fabric of reality around them. The spectral performers accompanied them down the living ladder of vines, their translucent forms growing more distinct with each step closer to the ground. As they reached the forest floor, the bell's resonance intensified, causing the air to shimmer with possibilities. The bear waited below, its massive form now wreathed in a soft, ethereal light that pulsed in sync with the bell's vibrations. When Mark's feet touched the earth, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, and the surrounding vegetation seemed to lean inward, drawn to the ancient artifact's power. "Look at this," Sarah whispered, pointing to her tablet screen, the only piece of technology still functioning in the enchanted space. The device was displaying rapid sequences of old photographs, images it couldn't possibly contain. Each photo showed different moments from the Starlight Circus's history, but with an impossible clarity, as if they were windows into the past rather than mere recordings. The bell pulsed warmly in Mark's hands, and suddenly the clearing around them transformed. The air filled with the sounds and scents of a circus evening from 70 years ago. Popcorn and sawdust, the murmur of an expectant crowd, the nervous energy of performers preparing for their acts. The spectral figures became more substantial, their movements more deliberate as they went through the motions of their old routines. "It's not just showing us the past," Mark realized, as Thomas's memories merged with his present understanding. The bell is helping to restore the connections that were scattered. It's remembering, and in remembering, it's rebuilding something that was lost. Sarah moved closer to examine the bell, her scientific curiosity warring with her awareness of its supernatural nature. "The engravings," she noted, "they're changing." The symbols on the bell's surface were indeed shifting, rearranging themselves to match the expanding pattern on Mark's arm. The bear approached, its eyes reflecting the same starlight that seemed to flow through the bell's metal. Through their connection, Mark understood that the bell's recovery had set larger forces in motion. The forest itself was awakening, responding to the return of the circus's magic. Suddenly, the bell chimed on its own, a clear, pure note that split the air like lightning. In response, 4 distinct tones echoed from different directions, the remaining sacred objects calling to their recovered sibling. Each resonance carried its own signature. The steady tick of the ringmaster's watch, the crystalline whisper of the dreamer's mirror, the haunting melody of the animal speaker's flute, and the deep, powerful pulse of the heart of the circus. The spectral performers reacted to these sounds, their forms becoming more agitated. Through their ghostly movements, they began to convey an urgent message, a warning. The bell chimed again, and this time Mark saw visions of others moving through the forest, drawn by the awakening magic. Not everyone searching for the circus's artifacts understood their true purpose or respected their power. "We're not alone in this quest," Sarah said, her voice tense as she studied the reactions of the supernatural gathering around them. The bell's awakening was like a beacon. Anyone sensitive to the old magic would have felt it. The bear released a low growl of confirmation, and through their connection, Mark saw flashes of different groups converging on the forest. Curiosity seekers drawn by rumors of strange lights, collectors interested in supernatural artifacts, and others with darker purposes who sensed the power gathering in the wilderness. The bell pulsed once more, and the spectral performers began to fade, but not before forming one last message in the air. Time flows differently when magic awakens. 3 nights until the moon's peak. But time's stream may twist and turn. The next token lies where earth and water meet, guarded by those who dance between worlds. Mark felt a sudden surge of understanding. "The ringmaster's watch," he said, memories of Thomas guiding his thoughts. "It's hidden near the falls, where the river splits around the twin stones. The water spirits have been its guardians all these years." Sarah quickly pulled up a map on her tablet, which now displayed both normal terrain features and strange, shimmering lines that seemed to represent currents of magical energy. "The Crystal Falls," she said, tracing a path with her finger. "About 5 miles east of here. But look at these energy patterns. The whole area is alive with unusual activity." The bear's posture changed, becoming more alert, more protective. Through their link, Mark understood that the path to the falls would be more challenging than their journey to the Ancient One. The water spirits were ancient and capricious, and their loyalty to the circus's magic would need to be reaffirmed. As if responding to this thought, the performer's bell chimed softly, its tone carrying hints of flowing water and ancient promises. The remaining spectral performers began to coalesce into a single form, a figure that Mark recognized from Thomas's memories as Marina, the circus's legendary water dancer whose performances had seemed to defy the laws of physics. Crystal Falls emerged through the morning mist like a scene from a forgotten fairy tale. Twin waterfalls cascaded down ancient rocks, their waters seeming to glow with an inner light that defied natural explanation. The performer's bell hummed softly in Mark's backpack, its resonance growing stronger as they approached the sacred site. The bear moved cautiously beside them, its massive form parting the morning mist like a ship's bow through waves. Sarah studied the falls with a researcher's eye, though her scientific equipment had begun behaving even more erratically than before. "The water's moving in impossible patterns," she whispered, pointing to places where streams flowed upward and droplets hung suspended in mid-air. "It's as if gravity itself is being rewritten here." The spectral form of Marina, the water dancer, floated ahead of them, her translucent figure leaving trails of light in the air. Through Thomas's memories, Mark knew that she had been more than just a performer. She had been a bridge between the human world and the ancient water spirits that dwelled in places like this. As they drew closer to the falls, the air grew thick with possibility. Shapes moved in the mist, not quite human, not quite water, but something in between. The bear growled softly, not in threat, but in recognition. These were the water's spirits, the guardians who had protected the ringmaster's watch for 7 decades. "They're dancing," Mark observed, as the spirits began to move in complex patterns around the falls. Their fluid forms twisted and flowed, creating shapes that seemed to tell stories of ages past. Marina's spirit joined their dance, her movements perfectly synchronized with theirs. and for a moment, the boundary between performer and spirit became indistinguishable. The performer's bell chimed unexpectedly in Mark's pack, its clear tone cutting through the sound of rushing water. The water spirits responded, their dance becoming more focused, more intentional. Through their movements, they began to reveal glimpses of the ringmaster's watch, brief flashes of gold and starlight behind the curtain of falling water. But something was wrong. The spirits' dance grew agitated, their forms becoming more chaotic. Through his connection with the bear, Mark sensed it first, other presences approaching the falls, drawing closer to their sacred space. Sarah's tablet screen flickered with warning signals, picking up multiple heat signatures moving through the surrounding forest. "We're not alone," Sarah warned, her voice tense. "Multiple groups converging on our position. They must have followed the bell's energy signature." The water spirit's dance became urgent, almost frantic. Marina's spectral form gestured desperately toward a narrow path that led behind the falls, where the watch lay hidden. But reaching it would mean crossing directly through the spirit's domain, where the laws of physics held no sway and time itself seemed to flow differently. Mark removed the performer's bell from his pack, its surface now glowing with an intense inner light. The symbols on his arm pulsed in response, and memories of Thomas's experiences with the water spirits flooded his consciousness. The bell had been used to harmonize with their ancient magic, to create performances that blended human artistry with supernatural power. "We need to prove ourselves worthy," Mark realized, the knowledge flowing through him like the water itself. "The spirits won't simply hand over the watch. We need to join their dance, to show we understand the true meaning of the circus's magic." Sarah looked uncertain. Dance with water spirits? Is that even possible for regular humans? The bear moved forward, its form beginning to shimmer with the same ethereal light that surrounded the spirits. Through their connection, it conveyed understanding. This was not about physical movement, but about synchronizing with the rhythm of nature itself, about finding the harmony that had made the Starlight Circus more than just a show. Mark raised the bell, and its tone merged with the sound of falling water, creating harmonies that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. The water spirits responded, their dance shifting to include the new melody. Marina's spirit beckoned them forward, her movements offering guidance. "Trust the water," Mark said, extending his hand to Sarah. "Like the performers did every night, like Thomas learned to do. The spirits aren't just dancing, they're showing us the path through time itself." As they stepped into the spirits' dance, reality began to blur around them. Water droplets moved in impossible spirals, carrying fragments of memories, performances from long ago. Moments of pure wonder when audiences witnessed true magic. The bear moved with surprising grace, its form sometimes solid, sometimes seeming to dissolve into pure light. Behind them, voices and footsteps grew closer. The water spirit's dance became more complex, creating barriers of mist and illusion to confuse the approaching intruders. But their time was limited. The watch needed to be retrieved before those who sought it for the wrong reasons could interfere with its awakening. The waters of Crystal Falls parted like a liquid curtain, revealing a hidden chamber behind the thundering cascade. Mark and Sarah, guided by Marina's spectral form and protected by the bear's powerful presence, stepped into a space where time itself seemed to pool and eddy like the swirling waters around them. The performer's bell resonated with an otherworldly harmony, its tone mixing with the ancient songs of the water spirits. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a column of flowing water that defied gravity, hung the ringmaster's watch. Its golden surface caught impossible lights, its hands moving in patterns that tracked not just hours and minutes, but the very flow of magic through the world. As they approached, Mark could see that its face reflected not just time, but possibilities, paths not taken, moments yet to come, and the delicate threads that connected past to present. The bear's form shimmered, and through their connection, Mark understood what needed to be done. The water spirit's dance had been more than just a test. It had been preparation for this moment. Their movements had aligned them with the ancient rhythms that the Starlight Circus had once used to bridge worlds. "And the watch shows the moment of convergence approaching," Mark said, his voice carrying the weight of both present understanding and past knowledge. "When all possibilities align, when the magic of the circus can be fully restored." Sarah's tablet screen flickered wildly, displaying fragments of images from different times, the circus in its glory days, the moment of its transformation, and glimpses of what might yet be. "The energy readings are off the charts," she breathed. "It's like every moment in time is trying to exist simultaneously." Outside the chamber, they could hear voices approaching, footsteps drawing closer. The water spirits, protective barriers, wouldn't hold forever against those who sought to claim the circus's magic for their own purposes. But Mark knew now that speed wasn't the answer. Harmony was. He lifted the performer's bell, its tone pure and true, and calling to its sibling artifact. The watch responded, its hands beginning to spin, creating patterns of light that danced across the chamber walls. The symbols on Mark's arm flared brightly, completing a circuit of power that had waited 70 years to be restored. Marina's spirit grew more substantial, joined by other spectral performers who emerged from the very mist of the falls. They moved in perfect synchronization, their dance telling the true story of the Starlight Circus, not just a show that entertained, but a bridge between worlds, a keeper of ancient harmonies, a place where magic and reality danced as one. It was never about hiding the magic, Mark realized, Thomas's memories merging completely with his own understanding. It was about protecting it until it could be properly awakened, until someone could understand its true purpose. The bear approached the column of water, its form now radiating pure starlight. Through their connection, Mark saw the truth. The bear had been more than a guardian. It was the physical manifestation of the circus's promise, the living bridge between nature's magic and human wonder. As Mark reached for the watch, time seemed to hold its breath. In that suspended moment, he saw everything clearly. Why Thomas had scattered the circus's essence, why he had been reborn in this time, why each step of his life had led him back to these woods. The circus had never been meant to remain hidden forever, but to return when the world needed magic most. The moment his fingers touched the watch, reality shifted. The water spirits' dance reached its crescendo, their forms merging with the falls in a display of pure magical energy. The spectral performers became fully corporeal, their joy and wonder no longer just memories, but living forces once again. Sarah gasped as the chamber filled with light, her scientific mind finally accepting what her heart had known all along, that some truths transcend rational explanation, that real magic lies in the connections between all things, in the moments when boundaries blur and possibilities become infinite. The watch and bell chimed together, their harmony calling to the remaining artifacts, the dreamer's mirror, the animal speaker's flute, and the heart of the circus itself. Through the watch's face, Mark could see them responding, their magic awakening, drawing them all toward the moment of convergence. The bear threw back its head and released a roar that shook the very foundations of reality. In that sound was the voice of the forest itself, celebrating the return of a magic that had been too long dormant. The water spirits joined the celebration, their dance becoming a symphony of light and motion that spread outward from the falls. Touching everything with renewed wonder, Mark stood at the center of it all, no longer torn between past and present, between Thomas's memories and his own. He was both and neither. Something new formed from the harmony of times and truths. The watch ticked in his hand, counting down not to an ending, but to a new beginning. The Starlight Circus was awakening, not as it had been, but as it was always meant to be, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of wonders. A reminder that magic lives in the hearts of those who dare to dream, who dare to dance between the moments, who understand that true wonder lies not in the performance, but in the connections it creates. As the chamber filled with the light of countless stars, Mark knew that their journey was not ending, but transforming. The circle was complete, but it was also a spiral, leading upward and onward to new wonders, new possibilities, new dreams waiting to be born. The forest had remembered, the magic had returned, and in the space between one moment and the next, between one world and another, the Starlight Circus danced once more. Dear readers, we hope that Mark Thompson's mystical journey through the secrets of the Starlight Circus has touched your hearts. To continue exploring worlds where magic and reality intertwine, we've prepared a special playlist with equally enchanting stories. Find it here by clicking on the left. If this story has sparked your imagination, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring new narratives that explore the boundaries between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Share your own stories of magical moments in the comments below. Magic is everywhere. You just need to know where to look.